Smash the like button if you agree that it would be a bad PR move for TKO and the WWE to allow Vince McMahon to buy back into the company. Every era has to come to an end, and I think Vince should focus on branching out in a new endeavor.
It's crazy how nobody is talking about this when it comes to fake pro wrestling media. The fact that Vince McMahon possibly wants to buy back the World Wrestling Federation. Now, do I believe that will happen? I'm going to say no. I believe that they will veto any offer that Vince McMahon proposes. I'm talking about TKO. Because TKO, they don't need Vince McMahon's money. TKO, they are doing just fine without Vince McMahon. I'm sorry. Listen, things have to come to an end. I feel like it was the right time for Vince McMahon to retire and step down. I'm a huge fan of Vince McMahon, but eventually we gotta move on. Vince McMahon was getting very old to be booking shows every week. The game done passed him by. I say let's give Paul Levesque a chance. Now, there's fans that are saying Vince McMahon might buy back the World Wrestling Federation and possibly fire Triple H. I'm like, hell no. That's never going to happen. TKO, they love Paul Levesque. Vince McMahon will never unseat Triple H. It's never going to happen. But let's say Vince McMahon does buy back into the World Wrestling Federation. I say make Vince McMahon a consultant. Make him a businessman. Because at this point, that's what Vince McMahon does best. He should not, and The Rock means not, become a full-time booker ever again. Vince McMahon had his time. Let's give Paul Levesque a chance. Rome was not built in a day. Paul Levesque has had this job for the past 3 years. Let's give Paul Levesque a chance. So, I'm hearing that Vince McMahon has his own sports media company called 14 in 1. So, by that same metric, by that same logic, I can't see him buying back into the World Wrestling Federation because he's in sports media. That's very different from fake pro wrestling. That means Vince McMahon is involved in the NBA, the NFL, baseball, that crowd, that audience. Right now, Vince McMahon has zero to do with fake pro wrestling. And I feel like it should stay that way. Vince McMahon should not come back to the World Wrestling Federation unless you want to make Vince McMahon a consultant for Triple H. That's fine, but no, he should not buy back in and fire Triple H. That's not going to happen. TKO will not allow that to happen. Nick Khan will not allow that to happen because TKO can easily veto any offer that Vince McMahon gives them. TKO, they hold all the cards, not Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon has no leverage. Yes, Vince McMahon still has some stock in the World Wrestling Federation, but it's not that big to a point where he can buy back to his full shares. He can't. TKO will not allow him to buy back his full shares. It's not going to happen because TKO, they don't need Vince McMahon's young moolah. They don't. Also, Vince McMahon might be a PR nightmare. Just imagine if they brought back Vince McMahon back to the World Wrestling Federation. That will be a PR nightmare. Yes, I'm a huge fan of Vince McMahon, the icon, the legend. But that legend needs to be in the past because the game done passed him by. Booking done passed him by. Like I said, in a weird way, that was the perfect time for Vince McMahon to step down. I'm talking about 3 years ago. That was the perfect time for Vince McMahon to retire and let Paul Levesque run the show. Do I believe that this rumor is true? That Vince McMahon wants back in the World Wrestling Federation? Yes, I wouldn't put it past Vince McMahon that he wants back in the company. I wouldn't put it past him. But there's also a strong possibility that Vince McMahon might make his own company. He might make his own fake pro wrestling company. I say, why not? If Vince McMahon has backers and partners, financial partners, fellow billionaires, I say I wouldn't put it past him if Vince McMahon creates his own fake pro wrestling company that will rival the World Wrestling Federation and All Elite Fake Pro Wrestling. Because Vince McMahon, he is very competitive. I wouldn't put it past Vince McMahon that he wants to start his own new fake pro wrestling company. I wouldn't put it past him. But at the end of the day, I think that TKO will say no to this offer that Vince McMahon wants to buy back in. Like, it wouldn't make any sense for TKO to invite Vince McMahon back into the company. Based on Paul Levesque and Vince McMahon, they will butt heads if they allow Vince McMahon to be partners backstage with Paul Levesque when it comes to booking shows. Trust me, they will butt heads. Let's talk about Cody Rhodes versus Roman Reigns. I heard that was a Vince McMahon call for Cody Rhodes to lose to Roman Reigns. It was a Vince McMahon call for Solo Sikoa to hit Cody Rhodes with a Samoan spike. That's what I heard. I heard that they were butting heads on which man was going to win that match, either Cody Rhodes or Roman Reigns. Why would you invite that back? I just feel like, from an emotional standpoint, that roster moved on from Vince McMahon. John Cena, Cody Rhodes, Roman, Randy Orton, that roster moved on from Vince McMahon. AJ Styles moved on. You cannot invite that back. Like I said, bitch, I'm a huge fan of Vince McMahon, but it gets to a point where we have to leave that in the past. Vince is an icon, a legend, but the game passed him by a long time ago. Now, I'm not saying that Paul Levesque is a better booker than Vince McMahon, but as a company, we're better off with Paul Levesque as the head man in charge, based on his age, based on how the fans feel about Paul Levesque. You will open up a huge can of worms, man, if you brought back Vince McMahon back into the fold. Good Lord, man. There's this dumb rumor about Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon. People are saying, oh, Vince McMahon is going to buy back the World Wrestling Federation and fire Paul Levesque, and he's going to bring in Shane McMahon. I'm like, man, that is such a bullshit rumor. It's not true. Do not believe it. Shane McMahon, to me, he wants nothing to do with fake pro wrestling. If that was the case, Shane McMahon would be in All Elite Fake Pro Wrestling right now as we speak, running the Death Riders BBC Club, but he's not. Is the World Wrestling Federation better off being bought back by Vince McMahon? I'm gonna say no. Hell no. This company needs to move on to bigger and better things. Don't move backwards. If you invite Vince McMahon back into the fold, that means your company is going backwards. For example, it's very similar to the Lakers and LeBron James. Like, bro, eventually the Lakers have to move on from LeBron James. If they don't, the Lakers will never improve if LeBron James, at his age, is still on a team as the top dog. That's my point. Also, another great example, Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots. Eventually, that era had to come to an end. Eventually, Tom Brady had no choice but to leave the Patriots. Everything has to come to an end. Everything cannot last forever. You can't have Vince McMahon booking shows going into his 80s, 90s, etc. That would make no sense, because fake pro wrestling evolves. I feel like Vince McMahon's mindset, it's somewhat 25 years old. Like, bro, we have to move on and we have to evolve with the times. People keep bitching and crying about Logan Paul having this top guy spot in the World Wrestling Federation just because this man did not grind on the indies. What the fuck is this? 2010? What is this? 2012? That's in the past, man. We are in the social media era where you need to have a huge platform. If you don't, why would the World Wrestling Federation sign you and push you if you don't have a built-in fan base that you built up outside of the company? This has been going on for decades. Like I said in my previous video, Kurt Angle had a brand. Brock Lesnar had a brand. Who else? Ronda Rousey had a brand. Gable Steveson, etc. Bro, there's people that want to see Conor McGregor in the World Wrestling Federation based on his big name value. Nobody cares about grinding on the indies, but let's talk more about the indies. Because when you build up your name on the indies, that means you are building up your brand. That has a connection with social media. That's why the Young Bucks are famous, based on social media. So how can you hate Logan Paul for having a top guy spot? Logan Paul was a self-made guy. Yes, he was famous before the World Wrestling Federation. That's why he was signed. So how can you be mad at that? That he built up a brand that had nothing to do with fake pro wrestling. I don't get it. This has been going on for decades. So how can you be mad at me because I built up a brand outside of fake pro wrestling compared to the typical indie dump fuck who does crazy ass stunts on the indies? So he's more deserving of a push than me? How? If my following and my brand, it's much larger than him, which means I'm more marketable than Joey, Janela, etc. So by your logic, you think Joey Janela deserves a push more than Logan Paul? That's your stupid logic. Like, bro, wake up. Stay woke. Nobody cares about grinding on the indies. That's in the past now. We don't need that, right? Let's talk about the WWF ID program. In order to be signed by the WWE ID program, you need a platform. You need a brand. That's my point. Why would the WWE ID program sign people who are nobodies? Right? Right? Am I fucking right? You need to have a platform to be involved in the WWF ID program. So what are you talking about? Karrion Kross, Logan Paul, he's doing just fine. In fact, people should be inspired by Logan Paul based on the fact that, bruh, you don't need to grind and bust your ass on the indies. You can be like Logan Paul. Build up a brand. And maybe the World Wrestling Federation will sign you. Let's talk about Tyrese Halliburton from the Indiana Pacers. Fun fact, this guy will have his own DLC in the next couple of months. He will be in the WWE 2K video game as a basketball player because Tyrese has a big name and a brand. He's marketable. He will sell DLCs, right? Last time I checked, Tyrese did not grind on the fucking indies.